Welcome to Jargon, a podcast bringing clarity to commonly misunderstood business concepts. We're debunking and simplifying the buzzwords and ideas plaguing today's business world and offering a fresh perspective on these topics. Good morning, everybody. This is Peter Purcell.
Happy New Year. This is our first podcast of the new year.
It is, and I'm actually quite excited. I think today, though, Bill, I'm going to ask you a series of questions about sales process, an effective sales process.
Well, okay, we're just going to jump right in.
Absolutely.
Right,
no
well, Peter,
ads, no nothing, man.
Oh, boy. Okay, Peter.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Bill Aimone here with my longtime business partner, Peter Purcell. We're kicking off this new year. Our New Year's resolution is to do at least more podcasts than we did last year.
Yeah, you don't want to say one or two a week, do you?
No, I don't want to commit to that right now. It's too early for resolutions, I think.
That's funny.
Or breaking them, anyway.
That's funny.
So.
That's true. Anyway, so to step back, again, what we want to do today is talk a little bit about what is an effective sales process. And as you all know, for our regular listeners, all two of them out there, we like to think in threes. So
all
Bill,
three of our listeners.
All three of our listeners. So, Bill, what are the top three things that people should think about when you talk about an effective sales process or implementing an effective sales process at a company?
Yeah, and before we dive into those, let's just level set what we're talking about here is organizations have sales teams. And maybe it's a sales team of 1 or 1,000. Every organization needs to have an effective sales process to basically control your sales organization, be able to grow your revenue effectively, and do the right things. And that's really what we're talking about here is how do I align the people who are out facing the customers, trying to get business. And for the most part, we're talking about business-to-business sales process. I'm not talking about the guy in the Starbucks store selling you a coffee.
A pink drink.
Or selling you a larger coffee or something like that. But I'm talking about business-to-business sales. And you have people out there, sales professionals who are trained, and they're out there facing off the market, meeting people, cold calling, and doing the things that they're doing to get business. And what we're talking about today is what are the three components any organization should have, whether you have one salesperson or 1,000 salespeople. What are the three key components your sales process should have?
Okay. Well, let's go.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to talk about three things: stage gates, actionable metrics, and clear roles and accountability.
Okay.
I just wanted to kind of set the tone here in terms of if you don't have these three, you might be in trouble.
Either that or you need to call us and we can help you.
Yeah, you can do that too. But the reality is organizations out there, some of them are successful despite themselves. They're out there bringing in revenue, growing their business. But then the question happens is what happens when competitors come into play? What happens when the market turns?
Yeah, what happens when your product basically is commoditized, right?
Exactly. And how do you internally maximize your potential in the market? And how do you do that? You need to have an effective sales process. The first one we talk about is stage gates.
Okay. So if you talk about stage gates, what I think of is kind of a consistent process with checkpoints that, you don't pass go, essentially, if you haven't either asked all the right questions or gotten all the right information or there's not the right signs. Am I right when I say stage gate like that?
Absolutely. Think
Okay.
about it this way. You may have a sales process that has different steps. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
The first step might be initial qualification. The next step might be discovery. The next step might be proposal and then closing, whatever those steps are in your process. But before you move from, let's say, initial discovery to qualification
To proposal.
to discovery,
Or even to proposal sometimes, right?
well, you don't want to skip.
I understand, but that's what I'm trying to get at.
Oh, you're trying to
you don't want
skip
to skip
steps.
Yeah, if you skip a step, what happens?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what
nothing.
I just
It's
jumped
called-
ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you skipped a step. Don't skip a step.
I skipped ahead. See?
All right, but
I'm
anyway.
not following the stage gate process for podcasts.
Okay, so think about it this way. There's different criteria that are met before you move from initial qualification to a discovery phase,
Okay.
before you start engaging resources. So, for example, if you're a engineering company and a sales rep is out there talking to a shipbuilder about engaging them, what are the initial criteria before you actually take it from qualification to discovery, before you're going to engage your engineering teams? Is there a checklist of items that you've met? So, for example, are you talking to the right person? Do they have a budget? Do they have a timeline? Are we talking to the right people? Having that checklist of, yes, we've qualified this before we start applying resources inside the organization to the opportunity.
That's fair. So by using that particular example, what you're suggesting is you don't want to waste resources, waste time, waste your salesperson's time pursuing something that they shouldn't be pursuing.
Exactly. And so let's say the first step is that qualification step. It might have a series of criteria that says, do they have a certain revenue criteria? Is their budget a certain amount? Does the company have money? And so all those checklist items before you bring them in the door. One of the things salespeople really, they're all about maximizing their commission, maximizing their revenue. How do you control it where they're just not chasing everything and wasting a bunch of time on rabbit trails that don't go anywhere? And you find out later that, wait a minute, you weren't even talking to the right person. They don't have a budget. The company's about to go bankrupt, and you've just spent 1,000 hours of engineering time to, build
Pursue
out
something that wouldn't have happened anyway.
Exactly. So those stage gates along the way. And so you skipped a step earlier when you talked about go to proposal.
Exactly.
What information do you need before you go to a proposal stage? Do you have all the right specs? Have you worked with their engineers to make sure all the right specifications are there along the way? Or even if, let's say you're a manufacturing company, have you validated that you have the right products? And there are the products even available that you can provide a proposal and meet their timeline.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to sell something you can't build, and you don't want to push something that you don't have.
Exactly. And you don't want to overpromise. And that's where a lot of companies get into trouble. The sales guy will promise the world and say, we can deliver all this. And when it comes time for delivery, the customer's disappointed. And then they get a bad name in the market and they lose that customer forever.
Right.
So, and some of the companies that have really good sales processes, I talk to them, I've talked to some CEOs that basically say, look, when we say no,
we mean it.
We mean it, and we're proud to say no. And we're the one company. One CEO of a chemical company told me, he said, we're the one company is the first one to say no, we can't deliver on that timing that you need. And they've built a reputation in the marketplace where people know they say what they mean and they meet their delivery expectations, and they win more work that way.
Exactly, and I'll bet you more people come to them as well.
Exactly.
Cool. So what's the second point, Bill?
Oh, so we talked about stage gates.
Right.
That's important to have good stage gates before you move to the next step and involve people.
So should you measure your salespeople then, maybe, as their compliance on their stage gate, compliance on sticking to the process, stuff like that?
Well, okay, so this is where things become interesting. A lot of companies, larger companies, have a CRM system of some sort.
Correct.
Where they're tracking the metrics in their funnel. And they're tracking all these metrics and having to put information in, and salespeople love having to put a bunch of information in.
Not.
That was sarcasm.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. That's why I said not.
Yeah.
Just for those of you that can't, sense the sarcasm through the microphone.
Yeah, exactly. You just don't see Peter's sarcastic face. That's all. But anyway, the salespeople, they put all this information in, they capture all this, and there's all these metrics they give to executives looking at our funnel, looking at conversion rates and all that. But the real question is not just having metrics. Everybody has metrics of some sort. Right. They've got a conversion rate, or they got a cost per acquisition, or whatever it might be. What are you doing with those metrics? Are they actionable? Are you looking back at them? So an example might be, am I looking at my acquisition costs of my customers? And then what am I doing about it? Am I going back and looking at, for example, one of our clients, they go back and look at the acquisition cost of the customer in addition to their margins. And they look at a lot of their customers saying, you know what, we've spent 1,000 hours to get this customer, and our margins are real thin and narrow. Do we want to go do business with that customer again, or do we need to increase our price to make up for the amount of hours we're investing in acquiring that customer?
Well, yeah, and Bill, remember, we've done a couple of projects where we've gone in and helped clients, and based on this type of metric that you're talking about, they have actually cut out an entire market or cohort of people that they were going after. For example, there was a client that we had that would service large chemical companies and smaller chemical companies. And it seemed that the smaller chemical companies were really easy to get, but their margins were so low, and it was better for them to focus on the larger chemical companies and get larger margins, even though it was slightly harder to get. So they stopped doing business with these smaller kind of mom and pop type shops and focused entirely on larger type accounts because of these types of metrics.
Yeah, and they're also measuring their win-loss rate too. When they're going after these smaller accounts, I seem to remember they had a huge high loss rate, and that's one of their actionable metrics was this. It doesn't cost us much to get that customer, but guess what? You went after 10 of them to get that one.
Right.
That's where you really have to look at your
right. And if I remember correctly, it was because the salespeople found it easier to get meetings with these people because they were probably bored, and so they were going after these companies as opposed to it's slightly harder to get a meeting in a larger company. But once you got in, you own their wallet.
Right, and that's where you get back to metrics. Do they measure meetings with people? No, I don't need to measure meetings with people. I need to measure things that are actionable I'm going to do something with, and I'm going to look back, and it becomes part of your continuous improvement process. Am I using that metric to make adjustments to my sales process and to what customers we're going after and what we're doing in the market? If you're not, then what are you doing with that metric? Why are you measuring it?
If the metric's not going to drive a process or process improvement, you shouldn't be looking at it.
Exactly. So we talked about stage gates. We talked about actionable metrics, not just metrics, but actionable metrics.
So what's the
third one is clear roles and accountability. And people say, "Oh yeah, duh, we know what that means." But a lot of times it's not clear in a lot of organizations.
Right. For example, who can say no to a sales process? Or are you coordinating properly? Like we talk a lot about S&OP, right? Sales and operation planning. Are you actually going to try to sell something that we can produce and we can deliver on time? Because if we can't, you should stop.
Well, you bring up the sales and operations planning process. It's a perfect example of roles and accountability. Who plays what role in the sales and operational planning process? So, for example, I might say, well, who owns S&OP?
Right.
Well, sales does, no operations does. Yeah. Who owns it?
Right.
And who's driving it? And so that's where a lot of organizations get stuck in determining availability of products, determining pricing of products or services, and then the ultimate thing is who has authority to make those decisions, and that needs to be clear. A lot of times organizations get real blurry on, can we offer a discount to this customer or not, and which customers are there account management teams that have authority over customer discounts versus a salesperson? Who's driving that, and where are those roles, and also roles and accountability? Who's making design decisions? Sometimes you have a salesperson who might be really good. Also, he used to be the engineering, is a good engineering guy. He's making some design decisions, but he's not up with the latest technology that the plant can...
Or regulations even, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So who's making decisions on the contract? You bring up regulations, you have legal. What are the different roles? Having those clearly defined helps make a smoother process because you don't have confusion. You don't have a salesperson going off going, hey, yeah, we can give that in the contract. Let me just go back and talk to legal about it. Well, no. How about this? I don't have the authority to do this. Let me get legal to approve before I make any promises.
Right. Well, and what that leads to is one of the suggestions that we always like to make is putting a governance model over this, so that what you do is you have all these different groups talking in the same room at the same time about these types of decisions.
Yeah, and that really goes into, and we'll get into this in another podcast, and we have an article on this as well. When you talk about governance and you're talking about like quarterly business reviews where you have all the different engineering and manufacturing and sales and finance all in the room together, that governance process, but also what questions need to be asked in those meetings and helping people be more informed and making that governance process productive. A lot of times when you say governance process, organizations will shy away and go, we don't need a bunch of bureaucracy.
Yeah, it's not meant to be bureaucracy. It's meant to mean teamwork.
Yeah, it's bringing people together, having a process for bringing people together, but then asking the meaningful, crunchy questions that need to be asked as you go through the process and challenging each other where the team comes up with a good answer. Involving finance in pricing, all those kind of things come into play here.
Agreed. So in the end, basically what you're saying is to set up a very robust sales process, you've got to have
stage gates,
then
actionable metrics,
and then
clear roles and accountability.
There you go. So there's the big three.
Those are three. And there are others, but these are kind of the three things. I'll call it the table stakes for having a good sales process. There's other things out there. We recognize that, but I think these are the key table stakes.
Cool. So for those listeners out there, I just want to say thank you very much for listening to this podcast.
Yeah, and look for our next podcast.
Thank you very much.